All right, shall we start the class this morning? 1, 2, 3. That works in Sparks. It works here too. I don't think we're going to spend much time on announcements. I'll pass this around and we'll have a copy of them for prayer requests at the end of the class if we have time. But we're blessed today to have Todd and Pamala Price with us to share what they're doing in their mission in Croatia. And rather than me spill any of the beans about it, I'll just let him take the whole deal. And so, Scott, if you and Pamela want to come up. Okay, let me get it. All right, let me get the PowerPoint started here. And
for the other class, no one passed around the prayer request sheets. So I'm going to give the first 4 rows request, and then whoever gets done in the first 4 rows, I'll give it the back rows. You're welcome to put your prayer request on.
I didn't turn the touch pad on, but you can use it.
From left to right. Right. Thank you.
Well, what a good group. Thank you all for coming. I'm very encouraged to see everybody here. My name is Todd Price. I grew up here in Oklahoma City, went to PC North, Hefner, lived in Bluff Creek for a long time. My father's passed away now. My mom's in a nursing home, but this is where I grew up. My wife, Pamela, is here. She's from Iowa. Had to go up to the frozen tundra of the north to find a wife. And so we are blessed with 7 children. Some of you have been following us for quite some time, and we appreciate your prayers for us. I think, as I mentioned in church, that Metropolitan has supported us for 30 years or more. So just a quick update. Our oldest is Timothy. So he's now 34, believe it or not. And time flies. Jonathan, and he lives in Kansas City. He works for the Missouri Department of Social Services. We'll be 34, thank you. Jonathan, our next is 32, and he is a software engineer for Khan Academy, living in California, actually up north near the Oregon border. And then over here, Elizabeth is our next. She's 29. She is a licensed social worker and a counselor, and her husband, Stephen, is a police officer in Kansas City, just turned 30. Matthew just turned 26 in August, and we were out there with him. He had another surgery. As many of you know, he's the one who lost his arm in 2020 in a motorcycle accident, and many of you prayed for him for years as he has made adjustments with that. He had 12 surgeries before. This was his 13th on Thursday, and that was to shorten the arm stub, which sounds strange, but it's actually intentional so that the prosthetic will fit properly. The arm stub won't be too heavy and cumbersome. So that went really well. We were with him, then we drove over from Atlanta last couple of days. So we're a little road weary, but we're glad to be with you all. We were helping him on his house. He bought a house that he's fixing up so he can rent out the upper part while he lives downstairs. And then Kirsten is 20. She lives in Kansas City, works as a receptionist at a hotel locally. And then Daniel is 16. He's here with us. And Ariella is now 13. So we do Bible translation. We're with a mission called Pioneers, but I'm also seconded to a group called the Word for the World Bible Translators. And I'm an international Bible translation consultant, and I will explain what that means as we go along. I'm also a regional consultant coordinator, and I'll explain a little bit of that as well. The Bible translation we do is for Roma or Gypsies. Many of them, actually, I'll give you a little bit of history, but we work specifically in what used to be Yugoslavia. The countries of Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, and Montenegro have a lot of Roma living there. The Roma actually came from India around 900 or 1000 AD, so we're not sure the exact details, but the group that left there went through what was called at that time Persia, then up through Iraq and Iran. Some of them went down into Egypt, and that's why when they arrived in Europe, a lot of people thought they were Egyptian, and that's how they got the moniker Gypsy. but actually there's no connection. They just, some of them happen to go down there, but they're all from India. The rest of them went up into Europe. And the situation in Europe today is that the Roma are a minority in every country in Europe, numbering anywhere from 12 to 16 million. It's hard to get exact statistics, but the Roma speak 85 or 90 different languages. So there's no such thing as a Roma language per se. There is a standardization that some have tried to work for, but in reality, they speak different languages. Only about 15 of them have any scripture, any Bible, and only about a half dozen of those have the entire Bible. So we work with the Roma to do translation. If you were in church this morning, this is a little bit of a repeat, but for those of you that weren't there, we finished phase 1 recently. Since we saw you last, we were here in 2020, but since then, I wanted to mention what has happened. So we chose 5 of those languages, the ones that were spoken in former Yugoslavia, because we had lived there for many years and were able to speak Croatian and Serbian as the what's called the LWC, the language of wider communication, so we could communicate with them. So we chose 5 languages that were spoken there, small languages spoken by anywhere from 25,000 to about 300,000 people: Arli, Gorbet, Chergash, Bayash, and Ludari. And in each of those languages, we translated the Gospel of Luke. So if you were to open, I have one copy, I'll just kind of pass around if you want to see what the language looks like. But in each of these copies, there's the Gospel of Luke and 50 chronological Bible stories from creation to the return of Christ, so they can have the whole picture of the gospel of salvation. And then a glossary, which just means a dictionary in the back to explain terminology that they may not be familiar with, like what's a Pharisee, and what's a things like that. What does it mean when it uses this term here for a parable? Things that we might be really familiar with, but in their language they hadn't heard of. The second copy of the book that we gave was a Bible story book. So I had the same 50 Bible stories, chronological Bible stories, but this time with pictures in it. And you can see each page just has a couple paragraphs for those who are just learning to read, and then a picture on the top. This, of course, is the story of Noah and the ark. And then we did a third edition, a third book, which we call a diglot, which means, if you see here, there are 2 columns. So again, it has the same pictures. This is the story of Noah and the ark. In this column here is a Roma language. The language is called Ludari. And then this column over here is Croatian. And the reason we did that is most people had never read in their Roma languages. It was just an oral language. There was no need for hundreds of years to have it written. So if they did learn to read, it was in school, and they would have learned to read Croatian or Serbian. So we used the same alphabet that they were familiar with from school, or from just signs and what everybody used there, and used pretty much the same alphabet. In fact, exactly the same alphabet, except for one character, one sound that they had in their language that Croatian doesn't have. So by doing this, they were able to see, this is what it says in Croatian or Serbian, and this is what it is in your Roma language. The Roma, by and large, are kind of a poorer people. They usually live in their own villages, separated from the majority population, separated from Croats and Serbs, or in a special neighborhood at least. And many of them live in kind of rundown housing. They tend to be a little less educated. Many of them in older days dropped out of school after just a few grades, especially the women. There was no real desire to go for more education. They tend to be looked down upon by the majority population. A lot of them end up digging through the trash, or basically whatever they can find for recycling. The vast majority are on welfare, probably more like 85%. This is our pioneers team there when they went door to door distributing a free copy of the Gospel of Luke and 50 Bible stories, and showing the people, even though you've never read in your language, I can show you in just a couple minutes how it works, and show you the different parts of the Gospel of Luke and then the 50 Bible stories. But they're very gracious people. They're very warm once you get to know them, once they learn to trust you. And we have teammates who live there in Croatia. This is a village that was just about 10 minutes away from where we used to live until we came back to the States. We were there in Eastern Europe for about 25 years. As we do Bible translation, I mentioned in worship that it's the Roma themselves who do the translation. You don't want a foreigner like myself or anyone else to be doing the translation as far as the final result. You want someone who speaks that as their, what we call their mother tongue, the language that they grew up speaking. So for each language, we have a team of 4 people, 2 of them, and these are 3 of our teams in this picture. This was a training workshop that we did in Slovakia a couple years ago when I was teaching a class on sociolinguistics. So the teams work together and do the translation, and then I come along as the consultant and check every word, every verse to make sure that it's ready for publication. Now, the way we do that, though, is through Skype or through Zoom. And so this is what most of our meetings will look like. So in this picture, this is the Gurbet language. So this gentleman down here is Sasha. He's a mother tongue speaker of, did I say Gurbet? This is the Arli language. And then Nicola Arli. And then this is Modric. He is what's called the exegete. And that means that he's not the mother tongue speaker like these other 2 are, but he's had experience in translating another language. They just finished the complete Bible in a related Roma language. So he's there. And then I don't have a picture of the 4th member. That would be someone who does what's called community checking or field testing. In other words, they try out the verses, and in the homes, they do a Bible study and just have people read it, listen to it, and get feedback so we can find out if we're using the correct terminology, etc. So these 3 different teams, this would be basically what our meetings look like. We meet together, 1 language on Tuesday morning, 1 on Wednesday, 1 on Thursday. And then here's our screen. Of course, you can't read it, but it just kind of shows you we'll have the translation we're working on, as well as some Croatian and English and Greek on the screen as well. And then this is me in my office there in Kansas City, where we're living. So whenever we do this translation work, it goes through a process where we have what's kind of a workflow, so that as I mentioned, 1 person will start the translation. They'll do a draft from English or from Serbian and Croatian. And then the second person will come along and look at it. They'll talk about it, discuss it, make changes or whatever. The 3rd person, the exegete, also looks at it and gives insight there. And then the 4th person, which is the community checker, will try it out in the home, get feedback, and find out if people understood it well, for example. And then they'll do a back translation, which means a very literal translation into either English or Serbian, so that I can read it and make sure I understand it fully. And then I'll meet with them, as in this picture, on Zoom, and then we just work verse by verse, word by word. We try to get about 50 or 60 verses each time that we meet, which is once a week. So these again, a picture shows these 5 different languages that we've been able to produce in the 3 different volumes of a very simple, inexpensive Gospel of Luke and 50 stories with no pictures that we can give out, and then the little more expensive ones in the color with the pictures as well. It's important also that when we translate, we make sure that we're focusing on audio as well. As I said, most of the Roma aren't readers. They're just not a reading culture. Some can't read, but even those who can don't really prefer to read. They're much more an audio or an oral culture. So we make sure to put it on YouTube, to put it in an app, and to make sure they have access to that. So our use case scenario, for the most part, even though we encourage literacy and want people to read and will be helping them in that process, we also realize that the first point of entry is probably going to be through Facebook or YouTube, listening to it, maybe with a little picture or something as well. So that's the focus that we have. Now, in the summers, we take a team over to Croatia. This is from June when we went, and there are 2 villages in the part of Croatia around the town of Sisak that we go to. There's no church in this village, so pretty much the gospel input they get is through the vacation Bible school that we have. There is one missionary couple that occasionally goes and does a Bible study, which is encouraging, but for the most part, this is all that they have, their exposure to the gospel. So we take a team over, so Pam and I and our 2 kids, and then We had 4 from our home church in Kansas City. And each of the vacation Bible schools are held outside. So we're always praying for good weather. And we had anywhere from 60 to 70 kids. There are 2 different villages that we went to. One of them speaks a language called Ludari. And the reason that's significant is the village where the Pioneers team lives is also a Ludari speaking village. And this village is an hour and a half away, kind of across Croatia, but they're related. We call them sister villages. The men and women kind of intermarry from there. If you can't find a bride in your local village, you usually go to that one. So there's a lot of relatives that live in different ones. So it's a nice, easy contact between the 2 villages. Again, it's about an hour and a half away. So normally they don't have very many opportunities to have teams come. And then there's a second village as well. We hadn't been to, the bigger village we'd been able to go to, I think it was our 8th time, maybe our 9th by now. We had a 3-year hiatus with COVID where we didn't have anything, but pretty much every summer we're able to go. But this other smaller village in this picture, we hadn't been to for about 5 years. We hadn't had time to go before, so we weren't quite sure how they would receive us, but they received us quite warmly. It's a different language. It's the Bayash language, the language of the blue book that I passed around. So in this picture, I'm just announcing, letting them know that we have Bible stories in their language and the Gospel of Luke in their language. And then we played the audio of the story that we had acted out for VBS as a skit. And then we also played the actual scripture passage. And as we did the story, you can see the kids are sitting around here. And then this is one of our summer teamers showing them the book. This was Jesus from Luke chapter 4, speaking in Nazareth in the synagogue. And then just the summer teamer is pointing out what words are being spoken so the kids can see how to follow along there. And I think a big highlight for me was being able to see a copy of the Gospel of Luke and 50 Bible stories given to every family there that had children in the VBS. So that was a real joy to be able to do that. And this is Ariella, our youngest, with one of the girls from the smaller of the 2 villages. So here we have the Gospel of Luke, you can see, and this up here says 50 stories from the Bible. After we had the Vacation Bible School, one of them lasted 3 days in the bigger village, and then one was just 2 days in the smaller village because of the way the schedule worked out. Then we had a teen club. So we had about 15, I think, teenagers from the larger village, and they came together for a couple of days of day camp. And so we were able to, this is our one of our summer teamers preached a message. 2 of the guys preached messages from Luke. The reason we did that is Luke is the only scripture they have. Nothing else has been translated. So we tried to make sure that the stories that we acted out, as well as the sermons that we had and the Bible verses that we did for VBS, everything was tied into the Gospel of Luke, the early chapters 3, 4, and 5. So as we go back next year, we can keep building on that later in the Gospel of Luke. So here the guys are reading. We'd already given them last year a copy of Luke. So this year we just printed out the passage that they were going to be doing. Another part of what I do, I alluded to briefly, is training. I mentioned that I'm an International Bible Translation consultant, which means I'm there to consult and help the translators to check the translations and make sure that they're accurate and as they need to be. But another role I have is as a trainer. So each of these translators are learning on the job to translate the Bible, and they have a program. It's a diploma in Bible translation, and it takes several years to go through it. So on a modular basis, they come together several times a year and meet either in person or over Zoom and take various classes. This is when I was in Serbia last year, and I taught a class on exegesis. Exegesis means explanation, basically. So teaching them, how do you take a Bible passage, study it, and know what it means well enough to be able to translate it. You can't translate something if you don't understand what it meant in the first place. So this was one of the classes that I taught there. Another role I have is it's called the Regional Consultant Coordinator. And the reason it's exciting is because things are growing. We have a lot of Bible translation going on, so we need more consultants. So I'll be helping to train other people to become consultants so that we can grow and tackle more languages. And let me give you some statistics that kind of show you why we need that. So as of 2024, there are 7,396 languages that we know of, and that includes sign languages, which actually need a different process for Bible translation because it has to be done in video. We have friends who are doing it in Japan, and it's a very costly process to not only translate, but then to film the actual sign language of that. But of the languages of the world, of the 7,396, over here in purple, this gives you the list of number of languages in the world that have a full Bible. So if you got up this morning and grabbed a whole Bible, Genesis to Revelation, and you brought it to church, you're one of only 756 languages that have a full Bible. Over here in the light green, 1,726 languages in the world have only the New Testament. They don't even have an Old Testament. Over here, 1,274 have what we call scripture portions. That would be like the languages we're currently working on. There's not a whole New Testament. There is, one of them has Luke, one has about 90% of the New Testament, but it's still not done. Let me go here to the far right. 1,131 languages don't actually need a translation. Either the languages are dying out, the population that speaks them are dying out, or they speak a different language just as well. So there's really no need for translation because, it takes 10, 25 years, depending, to translate. So you want to make sure that when you're done, all the speakers aren't dead. That would be probably not a good use of time and money. So 1,524 are currently being translated. That's what this is right here. Work is going on. Nothing published, but it's in the works because there's a lot that goes ahead of time. That you have to find out where the languages are spoken, how many speakers are there, what are the different dialects, how are you going to find translators, how are you going to train them. So it's still in the works. And then 985 have absolutely nothing. Nobody's working on them. Nothing has been even started. Now, those are languages, but obviously when you're doing World Bible Translation, you want to first translate the languages that have the most speakers. So if you were to put this into not numbers of languages, but numbers of people, the picture is more encouraging. So 6 billion, or 81% of the world, has a full Bible, which is wonderful. The numbers, though, still leave a lot to be done. So 835 million, 11% only have the New Testament. 6%, 468 million, have just portions, not even a whole New Testament. Scooting over here, this 0.2% don't need it, the 12 million. 136 million, or 2%, their languages are being started. There's nothing produced or published yet, but there's work taking place to get ready. And then another 29 million don't have anything. But if you take all those numbers and you put them together, that still means that 1.4 billion people speaking 5,500 languages need something. Maybe they just need a little bit. Maybe they're on the last book of the Bible and then they'll be done. Maybe they have nothing. But that means if you put all these numbers together, again, 1.4 billion people speaking 5,500 languages still need some sort of Bible translation. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of needs for Bible translators and for those who can help them. The task is still very large. What do we do when we do Bible translation? What are our goals? How do you go about doing a translation, and what are you trying to accomplish when you do it? What does it mean when we say that I'm a consultant and I consult people in that? Well, we have 5 goals whenever we seek to translate the Bible. The first one is clarity. We want to make sure that the translation is clear. And I'm going to give you some examples here as time allows. So we want to make sure that the target audience, the people that we're translating for, can understand it. If it's not clear, then we haven't really translated. Obviously, it needs to be accurate. The translation has to be faithful to the original languages, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic. We can't add anything to the Bible. We can't leave something out. We can't change it. We must make sure that it's accurate. Over here, though, natural. It needs to sound normal, not stilted. I mean, how many of you have bought a product at the store and you come home and you open up the instructions and you're trying to put it together and it's in English, sort of, but it's like, it was obviously Google translated from Chinese or something. You're like, I know what they're saying, but that's not how we would say it. You don't want that in the Bible. No one wants to read a Bible that sounds like it was translated by Google, and just doesn't sound natural. So a big part of translation is, how would you say this in your language? So this sounds normal. We want the Bible to sound like it's not even translated, that's how God originally spoke it. We want it to be that natural. Acceptable. There are certain things, the Bible has a lot of sex and murder and all kinds of stuff, and certain terminology, certain idioms you probably don't want to use in a Bible for public reading. And so sometimes as we'll be translating, they'll say, well, we can't use that word because it has a double meaning, or it sounds really close to a very bad word. So you don't want to use that one. So that one is something that we have to watch for as well. The one down here, literary, is a little more difficult. We want it to be stylistically appropriate or equivalent. We want it to have the same rhetorical force that the original had. If it's poetry, it should sound like poetry. If the person was upset, it needs to sound that way. If it's more peaceful, it needs to sound that way. If it's a rebuke, it needs to sound like that. So putting all this together, CANAL is the little acronym: clear, accurate, natural, acceptable, and literary. So let me talk about some of the things that can be a challenge in Bible translation. So I want to do a little experiment with you. Just quickly, I'll run over this, and then we're going to look at a passage of Scripture. Implied information is often difficult. I'll try to give you some examples here as we go along. Idioms can be very difficult. They don't always translate well across languages. Metaphors and similes, sometimes what's clear in one language is not at all clear in another. And multiple meanings we have down here. I mentioned sometimes the play on words are difficult as well. But let's look at a passage of Scripture. Turn with me in your Bible to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7. We're going to read some verses, but I want you probably know this passage very well, but I want you to listen to it as if you're hearing it for the very first time. Pretend that you're a Roma, a gypsy, maybe a, 10, 12-year-old girl that's been to maybe 5th, 6th grade, but that's all. Doesn't have an evangelical church in her area, hasn't read the Bible before, doesn't have all the Bible background. And she comes to this passage. Let's try to read it through her eyes, or listen to it through her ears, so to speak, and imagine what it would be like to hear it for the first time. What I'd like someone to do, someone who has a really nice, loud voice and clear, could you please read Mark 7, 1-13? But I have one other condition. Does anybody here have the New American Standard that they're using? Okay, if someone reading the New American Standard nice and loud and clearly, and I'll explain why I want the New American. But yes, could you do that?
1-13?
1-13. Mark chapter 7, 1-13.
The Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered to him after they came to Jerusalem, and saw that some of his disciples were eating their bread with unholy hands, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands, thereby holding firmly to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they completely cleanse themselves. And there are many other things which they have received as traditions to firmly hold, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and copper pots. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk in accordance with the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with unholy hands? But he said to them, rightly did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. And in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men. He was also saying to them, you are experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and the one who speaks evil of father or mother is certainly to be put to death. But you said, if a person says to his father or mother, Whatever I have that would help you is korban. That is given to God. You no longer allow him to do anything for his father or his mother, thereby invalidating the word of God by your tradition, which you have handed down, and you do many things such as that.
So, as a Bible translation consultant, when I read or listen to a passage like this, I ask myself, is there anything here that someone could misunderstand? Because the goal is not just that they understand, but as much as possible that they don't misunderstand. And there is a difference. Because you can translate it in a way that, yeah, I understand that, but you also have to be thinking, how could they misunderstand it? Is there anything I can do? Clarity is not just producing understanding, but minimizing the potential for misunderstanding. So let's just go through this. Again, you probably heard this, like I have all my life, and it's like, well, this is clear, but put yourself in the shoes of a young Roma girl that has it. In verse 1, the Pharisees and some of the scribes. What's a scribe? Well, if you were to translate that literally, in fact, in early drafts of the first language we worked on, they used the Roma word for someone who writes, okay? Well, that's not really the point of it. This was not a dictation secretary per se. It's true, their job was to write things down, and they did make copies, but what did they make copies of? The Bible, okay? This was obviously pre-Gutenberg, so everything they had to be written down. These were those who wrote down copies of the scriptures, and as ones who had access to the scriptures, they were the experts in it, and they interpreted it. So basically, they weren't just writers; they were teachers. In fact, in our translation, that's how we said it. We said teachers, but even there, you need to be a little clear. Teachers of what? They're not school teachers. Teachers of the law. Even that was not clear, because if I say teacher of the law, most Roma will think, well, that's civic law, like don't speed or pay your taxes or stuff. No, we actually had to translate this teachers of the law of Moses. Why? Because that's the point. Pharisees and scribes means the Pharisees and those among them whose job it was to teach the law. So even a simple word like scribe can be misunderstood. Most Roma would assume that it just means someone who can write down, and that would miss the point. The whole point of this passage is the experts in the law, the Pharisees and those who studied the law and taught it and interpreted it, were cornering Jesus and trying to get him in trouble because they disagreed with his interpretation and application of the law. It also says, even the word disciple, think about it for a minute. What does disciple mean? How would you define the word disciple? Follower. Good. Student. So the most literal translation would be student. But again, a Roma who's not exposed to the culture of the Bible would assume it's the same word as a student in school. Well, that's not the point. The point is it's someone who is a follower of a religious teacher. So we have to be careful, even in that, the different terminology that we use. Think about disciple. When do you ever use the word disciple in English if you're not in church or using Christianese? That is a Christian word. It doesn't exist outside of the church setting, right? We just, well, in Greek, it was just the word for student. So some of that is lost. A lot of terminology that we only use in Christian settings, if you translate them literally, will lose all that meaning. It would literally just be, and the students. So you have to be careful about how you are bringing that across. When someone reads this passage and they don't understand the setting, they might think, why are the Pharisees so upset with dirty hands? Is this a COVID-19 type thing? You didn't wash your hands? It says that they saw him eating without washing his hands. Were they concerned that he was going to get sick or something like that? No. We know the background. The Pharisees were sticklers for the oral law. In other words, not just what Moses wrote down, but then the myriad of laws that grew up over that to try to keep you as far away as possible from breaking that law. So they added oral laws. So they tried to extrapolate from the law. Well, okay, if we're not supposed to touch if we're not supposed to touch something that died, what if I have been in the marketplace and I brush up against a Gentile who doesn't have that law and they had been? Well, then it's like third degree unholiness or whatever. They were very like, okay, anytime you go to the market, you need to be sure and wash, because you don't know, even if you were faithful, the guy that you bumped up against might not have been. So when it says seeing some of the disciples that they ate with common hands or unwashed hands. The Roma would not catch the implication there of what it would be about. So in the early language, we said, and they saw some of his disciples how with unwashed hands they ate bread, which means their hands were dirty according to the custom of the Pharisees. The whole point is not that they were just dirty like you might get sick or something like that, but it was religiously or ceremonially unclean. So when we say unclean, we've heard that a lot, right? And you read Leviticus, you read the law, unclean, unclean. We know because we've read the Bible that means ceremonially unclean. How's a gypsy going to know that? It's just the word dirty, literally. So the Pharisees are concerned that he's eating with dirty hands. That totally misses the point of this passage. So in the Chergash language, we said they ate bread with unwashed hands, which means that their hands were ceremonially dirty. Like even in the many times in the gospel, it says there was an unclean spirit. Okay, we have to be really careful. What's an unclean spirit? Does it mean he's dirty? Well, it's the same word. Okay, we know unclean. That's not a word we use, right? In the secular world, we say something's dirty. If we say unclean, that's a church word, right? That's a religious word. Not in the Roma language. It's clean or not clean. So we have to say ceremonially clean or something along that line. In the Gurbat language, we said to eat bread with unwashed hands, which means their hands were dirty according to the customs of the Pharisees. It's very important. That's what we call implied information. If you came to my house, you were sitting in the living room, and I said, coffee? I've only used one word, right? But my voice intonation, where you're sitting, the fact that in our culture that the host gives something to the visitor, I don't have to say, would you like some coffee? And if your answer is yes, I'll go into the kitchen and get a cup of coffee and bring it to you. All that was implied, just with my voice inflection and the setting. There's a lot of implied information that we know because we have the whole Bible and years of reading it. And the first century Jews in Israel knew all that as well. Obviously, Jesus didn't need to explain all that. But a 21st century Roma kid living in a village doesn't know that. So in Bible translation, that's what we say here with implied information. What we assume the hearer already knows, so we do not need to be explicit about it. Just like coffee, or not anymore, but in the States, but it used to be they'd fill up your car with gas, right? They would do that for you. In Europe, that's how they still do it. So I get out of my car at a European gas station and I say one word, full. I don't have to say, please fill my tank until it is full. It's just one word because it's obvious. That's implied information. There's a lot implied that can be missed in translation if the people don't understand the background. So now let's just go on. We're still just starting out in this passage, but let's look in verse 3. Someone read for me just the very first part of verse 3.
For the Pharisees and all the other Jews do not eat unless they carefully wash their hands.
Okay. So is other in italics? Yes. Why? Because in Greek it says the Pharisees and all the Jews. Now, wait a minute. Doesn't that imply the Pharisees are not Jews? Is that how we use and in English? If I was to say, everybody aged 50 and female, do this. Okay. The and that makes a distinction there. Well, when it says the Pharisees and all the Jews, it sounds like the Pharisees aren't Jews. That's not how we use the word and normally. So that gives the wrong idea. So actually the New American Standard did a good thing. They added the word other. In other words, what it means is this is the law that the Jews follow, and especially the Pharisees. So there we need to be careful. If we're super literal, then they will misunderstand it and they'll think that the Pharisees are not Jews. So in Arli and in Chergash, we said the Jews and especially the Pharisees do not eat. Also in verse 3, it says they carefully wash their hands. If you have a footnote, some of the Bibles say with the fist. Now, that's because the Greek is very opaque here. What's it mean to wash with the fist? Well, first of all, just as a side note, we don't use footnotes really because most Roma don't use footnotes. They would just skip it. But also, as I remember what I said, our main target is audio. Well, you don't do footnotes in audio. So anything that they need to know pretty much needs to be in the text. So if we do it super literally, say they do not wash with the fist, that might not make a whole lot of sense. Now there is some debate. I won't go into. It could mean a fistful of water. In other words, adequate enough. It could mean this is kind of a complicated thing, but many think it means up to the elbow, which actually fits in their context. So if we did this very literally, it'd be saying, do not wash up to the elbow. But so in the Arlie language, we said they do not eat unless they wash their hands up to the elbow. And you might be thinking, wait, you just said hand. Why do you say hand up to the elbow? Well, in English, we have two words, hand and arm. In Roma and in Croatian and Serbian, it's just one word. It's one word for this whole thing. So I'm saying wash your, we would have to translate literally arms up to the elbows. We wouldn't take the word for hand. So even there, you have to be careful because a hand up to the elbow doesn't make any sense. So in translation, we had to translate it as do not wash their arms up to the elbows. Okay, that's just something where you have to figure out in each language how the words don't have a 100% correlation. Sometimes in one language, it may just mean your hand. In others, it may mean your entire arm. But again, the idea, we're not doing a study Bible where we can go into a lot of history. So when in the Chergash language, I think they did a better job. They said they do not eat unless they wash their hands ritually. That's the whole point. The Pharisees were upset with Jesus because they didn't follow all of their special rules. They wanted him to wash to the elbow, which means a certain amount following their ritual. And that's why they were coming down on him so hard. But the other thing, we needed to say ritually unclean, as I mentioned before, so they understood the whole point is not just dirty hands and germs, but being acceptable to God. If you look at verse 5, yeah.
So in this translation, you were just telling us about why didn't you use the ritually this in there?
When we do the translation, we basically let the decision fall with the translators. And so in one of the languages, they felt like it would be best to explain it by saying ritually. And in two of them, they wanted to keep it a little more literal. And that's what you find in different languages. Some of them want to be more literal. Some want to be a little more explanatory. So that you're very sharp to catch that.
So which way do you go? Or do you go with both ways?
No, I let the team decide. I give them, as a consultant, my job is to ask a lot of questions, give advice, look at the pros and cons, and then they get to make the decision. So in a meeting, we would talk about it, and I might say, will people understand that? And they say, yeah, they'll know that there's something going on if they're saying up to the elbow, that implies that it's something ceremonial. So a lot of it depends on the culture. A lot of it's the target. Are we translating for like two of these languages are from Muslim background. One is from Eastern Orthodox. Two are from Eastern Orthodox and one's Catholic. So your audience matters as well. Also, how mature is the church? If the church has been around a while and they understand these things, then they don't want to over explain because then that's kind of dumbing down. And then if there are very few believers or if they're less educated in biblical terminology and things, then they might want to be more explanatory. So it's the whole idea of for whom are you translating? If I was translating for you, I'd be probably pretty literal because I can assume a lot of understanding. But if I'm translating for people that have never heard this, then I need to explain more. But it's always on a continuum. Where are we on this? How you can go too far and explain everything, and then that has some downsides as well. Yes. Yeah.
As a consultant, do you specifically need to be able to speak all three different languages?
Yes and no. No, thankfully, because I can't. There's just too many. We've worked on 5 of them. But over 2 things is with our software, it's pretty intelligent. It can guess the translation. And then as you go along and you answer, yes, that was a correct translation, it learns the algorithm, and so it can guess later. So a lot of it it can be guessed. The second thing is I've been at it long enough that I can understand probably 2/3 of it. And then the third thing is the back translation. So anytime a translation is done, Then a very literal back translation is done in the language of whatever the consultant can understand. So for me, that'd be English or Serbian or Croatian. So that, by the way, is not a good translation. You never read it. It's super literal on purpose. So I can see exactly why they did that. Okay, I can't tell, is that a perfect or a present? You know, well, I need the back translation because my grammar is not necessarily up to speed.
And when you first were there, I guess in Croatia,
Uh-huh.
is this the same job that you had?
No, I've done a lot of different things. No, we did. Oh my goodness. No, that's a short answer.
Team leadership development, team leading, and did a translation in the New Testament of Bosnian.
Yeah, and we had an English library. We had started a Bible school. I taught at 2 Bible schools. We had a co-op for, not a co-op, but an English library for what am I trying to say? For homeschoolers and things. So yes. Yes, they are. More of them are going to school, which is an encouragement. More of them are finishing high school. So yeah, it is getting better. It was a lot less prevalent than it is now. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Did the Roma have any existing spiritual beliefs?
Yes. 2 answers to that. One is they normally take on the religion of the major culture, whether that in our case would be either Catholic or Orthodox or Muslim. And they would follow most of those basic beliefs, but they also tend to have a lot of superstition and kind of their own things, like especially around childbirth or death, you know, like when someone dies, how you handle that or what you do, setting out food for the spirit or things like that. So there's a real mix, or, you know, killing a goat and burying it on the foundation of your home when you build it. So there's a real mix. Some of it would go back to probably to Hinduism because they came from India. But it's just kind of a real syncretistic mix. Yes.
Back to Mark 7. Interesting how you handled the concept of holding firmly to the tradition of the elders, since that's so crucial in the passages. How did you communicate to that? Because that'd be somewhat culturally how they saw traditions, whether that was a good or a bad thing.
Right. That was actually pretty easy. Customs, they would hold very strongly to customs, and so they have a term that's pretty clear. The harder part was elders, because the word just means old people. So you say the customs of old people. That's not really the point. The point is an elder was someone with status and had been doing this for years and years. So we would, for the Arlie, we said, why do your disciples not keep the custom of our elders? That's key, not just old people, but our. And then in Chergash, why do your disciples not keep the old customs which our forefathers laid out for us? So the idea that, okay, this is something that goes back historically. Very good question. Yes. Other questions? By the way, Pam, you can stand up here. We got a few more minutes. We'll go to Q&A. Okay. Yes.
But there being 4 gospels, and Luke being the primary one that it seems like is translating. It's the translate. Thank you.
I was not the consultant at the time. I was the project coordinator, and that's what my consultant said. But I think the reasoning would be twofold. With Luke as well as with Matthew, you get the birth, and so for Christmas, it's good for outreach, whereas Mark and John don't actually have a birth event. Also, the Jesus film is based on the Gospel of Luke. So in any language, once you get the Gospel of Luke done, we haven't done this, but in theory, you can give it to crew and then they will make the Jesus film out of it. And so that's easier. Matthew, I'm assuming we didn't do Matthew because there's so much Old Testament that they would just be completely lost. So Luke seemed to be a good one. Good question. Yes.
How would AI assist or enhance what you're doing?
There are a lot of things that AI can help with. The software that we use, a lot of guessing, you know, it can see what's been done, and just by statistical analysis can say, well, you've taken this word, you know, 15 times this way and 2 times this way. Here are the suggestions. There's also one of the big things is if you can get a New Testament, then use kind of a type of AI to produce a draft of the Old Testament, because you have a lot of, same concepts and things. And if you have a corpus that's large enough for it to learn from, then it can project. Usually it's the grunt work, the draft. It's never going to flow well. It's going to miss idioms, probably. It's going to miss nuances. It's going to miss potential bad words. But it can be used to kind of populate quickly to get started. And the Bible translation world is using AI, but somewhat cautiously, because there are a lot of pros, but it's not the panacea. Yes.
I think though probably AI would have a great influence on audio, would it not? Because AI is really good if you have a pattern language to have an audio Bible from.
Well, the problem is that works well in major languages where you have a lot of recording and you have a lot of simulation and practice. But in these minor languages that don't have anything, it's going to really mess up the intonation and the accent. So you pretty much need a mother tongue speaker to actually record it. Anything else is going to sound really off. So that's a good question, though. Yes.
How many Roma are there?
In Europe, the statistics are 12 to 16 million. Yeah.
And all the different languages you talked about, are they different dialects of similar, or are there different languages? 1,000 different languages? Or?
Right. There are 85 or 90, and they fall into 7 groups. So 6 of them, they have some similarities. Like the 3 that we're working on, one reason we chose those 3 is there's about a 60% overlap. They're in the same family group. And then there's one just called Para-Romani, which is technically the Roma people as far as their culture and history and DNA and everything, but they've lost the Roma language and picked up another one. So it's totally unrelated, except for the loan words, which is the other reason we chose a cluster approach, is the words that they're going to use that they don't have in their language, they're going to borrow from Croatian and Serbian, so they're going to be the same or very similar. And one thing we do is we always have all 3 of these up on the screen, so I can say, well, yesterday in this language we decided to do that, and they'll say, nah, that's not good, or they'll say, oh, that's a good idea. So there is the cross-pollination of having those.
Whenever you have a missionary story to tell us about someone who came to Christ as a result of your ministry.
Can we talk about one now?
That wasn't really related to
Okay.
thing. I can't actually point to a conversion from it. There have been several times where people they've heard it or read it like, what? That's my language? I've never heard the Bible in my language, or I've never heard a foreigner, like for me trying to pronounce it or something. And one of the guys, he's even a translator, he says, I just get goosebumps when I hear it in my language. It's different. He said, I grew up in, reading the Bible in Croatian, but in my language, he said, literally, my brain works differently. And he says he just literally gets goosebumps.
And these were just produced from the last time we saw you. So
Yeah.
it's still a very new thing. And the communities don't have any church. Well, there's one community that has the Gospel of Luke. There's one very charismatic church that has 10 people or less. But there's nothing as far as in their community. So there's no place. We passed out little business cards to all of the kids that were there, and it's got all of the information, because they'll have a phone even though they don't have other stuff. They don't have dryers. They're they might washing machines for the rich of them, that kind of thing. The standard of living is much lower than it is for us. Very, very few clothes, that kind of thing. But they'll have a phone and they communicate and text with the phone. And so getting that oral on the phone, that was very, very important. And so then they can listen to theirs. So it's a really new kind of thing. I mean, as far as conversion stories, like with the Southern Baptist missionaries who were in Bosnia, Todd had his Bosnian secretary gal, Amina, was a believer, but she became a believer through the Southern Baptist missionaries that were there. And then when they left, they gave us like a slew of their furniture. And so we were able to make use of that. And then it went to another ministry when we left Bosnia and went to Hungary. So it's a very slow, in that place, it's like taking a field out in the field. What do you have? You have a lot of rocks, you have a lot of root stumps. You know, if you're going to plant a field out of what is just a ground that's not ever been a field before, you got lots of stuff to do, lots of rocks to check out. So that's kind of the way that Eastern Europe is in general. The gospel, you know, was once there, sort of, maybe a long time ago, but it's really not been for a long time. So it's a lot of rock chugging, really. And one of the things here, if you didn't get a credit card, not that you have to, but if you want one, you can take one. The summer team ministry too, I mean, that's kind of like ground zero where we come into the community, the parents and the other people in the village stand around. There's nothing going on. No foreigners come in the village unless it might be a government worker taking some census, and then they're all going to hide and maybe not tell them the truth. But because they don't necessarily like that. But they will come to the kids clubs. And so we are Americans. They are like, oh, there are these rich Americans coming in to our village. This is a big deal. And they'll just come out of curiosity. But in the meantime, you know, they hear the gospel and acting out the stories. They're very warm people when you get to know them, but maybe harder to build trust from the get-go. But because of our missionary team who is over there, who had already, you know, they've lived there for longer than we were in this village, involved in this village. So they were there and made friendships, and then they went a few times to this other village of Seesock where we would go and for the summer ministry. And so they know those faces. They would go sometimes to visit, like for a Christmas club or for a little Easter club in somebody's house and that. This year, that village of Seesock has built a community center. So the cool thing is maybe this year we can get permission to actually meet with our big club in the community center. Like if it rains or something, we'll see how we can make use of that facility. Because you think about it, for crafts, what do? We spread out tarps and all the kids sit on tarps, okay? And we have to wait until about 4 o'clock, 4:30 before the sun is not too hot. This is in the end of June, so it's not so hot and the kids don't get heat exhaustion and all that. And then we sit and we have the drama where we dress up in Bible time clothes and we do act out the story. Then they hear it. This year, for the first time, they were able to actually hear the passage in their language because we played the audio and say, this is the Bible. This is what you have. This is what's on the card. And then they have the Bible story book that we had, you know, he was showing the pictures of that where it's got the pictures for the kids. So then each of us summer missionaries would sit around with a group of the kids and say, look, here it is. And we would play the audio of the Bible story and follow along because this is the first time that they've ever seen their language in print. Okay, wow. They don't, unless it's on their phone, you know, and then there's not a standardized exactly spelling, although it is a phonetic language, but they've got this other vowel, so they've got this other, you know, one letter different. But so they see. So as they're hearing it, then they can see on the Bible story, you know, where it is. And so they've got that. And then we do a memory verse. We do a theme for the day. They don't have a concept of God that's accurate. And so we're trying to teach them, what is God like? Who is he? And so teaching them a main theme of the day, question, and then an answer that they repeat throughout the club and sing some songs and stuff like that.
So we are out of time, but just real briefly, if you want to get our prayer letter, out in the foyer, you can sign up either your email or your regular snail mail, and we can send that to you, or you can, it's all online. This is a website. It's my name, toddandprice.com. And so if you go there, you can get the prayer letter. Also follow us on.
We'll send everybody that link.
Awesome. Okay.
And the prayer requests, we go through our calendar literally and like give you things that are accurate for that day.
Here's today's. Pray as we speak at Metropolitan Bible Church. Thank you very much. You're very attentive. I know it's a lot of information, but thank you.
Okay, well, I'll let this go long today because I felt like it was better to hear this. We don't get a chance to hear the Prices very often, and wow, what an amazing work that they're doing. And we can see how the Lord is using their work along with even the phones and all the AI and all the other stuff that's going on in the world. Lord's going to end up changing our world, and we pray every day for that to the better. So let me close in prayer, and we'll leave.